I'm Brian Briscoe, host of the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast, and it's a different podcast format than everything else out there. I bring together a new and experienced investor on the episodes and let the aspiring investor ask the questions that they need answered to push their business along to the next level. And if you're an aspiring apartment investor yourself, you probably have the same questions. So now, before we get to the next episode, make sure you hit the subscribe button and that little bell below to make sure you get notified every time we post a new episode. And now, enjoy the show.
What advice would you give somebody who's 6 to 12 months behind you?
Take a step in the direction of where you want to go. Let's just speak to my fear, my concern right now is like, I don't know what I'm doing very deeply in the fund space. I'm connected with the right, some really good people, some teams, but there's lots that's sitting on me that I need to figure out. Same thing in the multifamily space. If you don't have a bias for action, just simply take a step in that direction. And then after you take that step and take another step in that direction, that's in towards that area. So there's lots of people that come to us, oh, you guys are ahead of me. All I've done is single families. It's like we were just like you, to your point, 6 months ago or a year ago, and we just took an uncomfortable step towards that direction. And that's probably the best, the most generic, but also helpful advice that I could provide.
Yeah. Welcome to the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe with Four Oaks Capital. Got another great episode lined up for us today, and it's with Johnny Nelson. So Johnny, welcome to the show today.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me. Thanks for allowing me to share my story. It's it's our team's first bigger deal. So it's super exciting to be able to share that and be part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for coming on and sharing it. I mean, I think it goes both ways. We rely on, good people like you to share their story, to actually have the podcast. So you beat me too. I was going to say the exact same thing. Thanks for coming on the podcast and sharing your first deal with us. But understand your wife was part of the team, and unfortunately she's not going to be able to join us today. So, we just have Johnny, but that's still a good thing. So
half of a good thing is, maybe we'll try to deal with that, huh?
Yeah. Half of a good thing is most of the time still a good thing. But I think in this case, we're going to do just fine. So anyway, send her my regards, and maybe we'll get her on later. But
I like that.
So first of all, let's talk a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about your background, and kind of walk us up, from your background to how you got into multifamily.
For sure, Brian. So my family moved up to Alaska when I was a teen, actually. Mm-hmm. And we had some good friends up there, and it was kind of like a new frontier, and just kind of we just kind of got into the grind of where we were, and it was just a fresh start for the family. So I moved up there, and not too long after that, we got into the construction space. My family was basically a contractor, and I was I was a contractor and a carpenter and a builder. And then after maybe 10 years of that or so, I decided to go back to school actually, and get my engineering degree. So that was a whole journey in itself, just kind of a new career path, new progress, a new line of progress there. And did that for, a number of years, these last 2 years. And just coincidentally, I left my engineering job about 3 weeks ago. So that was, was making good money, but, with the hard to get enough traction, at least in my mind, to grow the real estate and the capital raising piece of where I think our family could go and should go. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the step to now. And then even to give the folks a little bit of context of why real estate, like all of a sudden I've done all this stuff, and all of a sudden, where does real estate fit in? And that started around 3 years ago. And I mean, I bought my first house ever in my life in 2017. So, it's like, 5 years, but, still fairly recent. And then about a year later, just a colleague mentioned, like, hey, I'm like house hacking. I'm like, what's that? And kind of explained it. And, as most people do, it's bigger pockets and all the normal media in that space. And then why and how did we then step from the small stuff into the larger stuff? I joined the Jake and Gino community. You guys heard of them. And that's for coaching and mentoring and the network and all that kind of stuff. And that was in the fall of 2021.
Okay.
Actually, fall of 2020, sorry. And without that, support network, I wouldn't be here stepping into this, or we wouldn't be here, our team wouldn't be here stepping into this, a large to us deal. So that's kind of, that's a real short summary of how we got to here.
Yeah. Now, incidentally, were you at Jake and Gino's event in 2021, October, the Orlando one?
Yes. Yeah. The MM4.
All right.
So yeah.
Yeah. It'd be nice to be able to kind of rewind that. I was there too. And, I'm sure there was, we were in the same room at one point, guaranteed on that. Yeah. Really, really big conference room. I think there was 800 people there. So, I mean, the event was so big that I saw people that I have known, virtually, recorded podcasts with, but I saw people like the week after, post stuff on, Instagram or LinkedIn or whatever. And I'm like, man, I never even saw them there, but yeah. Anyway, good event. I think Jake and Gino have a solid program. A lot of raving fans. I've talked to a lot of people, and I think everybody who's been with them has been quite pleased with what they put on. So yeah,
that's true. Yeah, we did a thorough search. Not that it's a plug for Jake and Gino, they're obviously not paying me to say that, but I mean, we did a thorough search. We really didn't find anything negative, and it fit really well. Family oriented and strong ethics, and just a good, really good community, really. And we just fit in.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think that the community aspect's important. I mean, the education has to be there, but I really think community does more. At least it did more for me up front, more than I realized it was. I think for me coming into this business, I thought it was how much I know, and if I can just learn a little bit more and learn new techniques or how to do things. But looking back at it, it's been more the community and the people that have helped me kind of move forward in leaps and bounds. And that's one of the big benefits of joining like a Jake and Gino program, where you've got a lot of people in there. So anyway.
Yeah, it's a very natural, when you connect, like it's so hard and you're struggling, you're trying to learn. And then as you kind of release some of that ego and some of that I can do it and I can be smart, and it goes from so difficult and you're not sure how, and all this uncertainty, and then all of a sudden you kind of connect with the right team, and things are just that much more organic, and they just seem to be like they're made to be. So that's something there. Not that it's not hard work, but it's just it feels so much more natural.
Yeah, you still got to put in the work, but it just makes everything a lot easier, so but cool. So let's rewind, when you're kind of making this decision to pursue real estate more, what was the motivation behind it, or what was I guess what I call your big burning why for doing this?
I think it's kind of evolved, Brian. Initially it was, my wife and I had just kind of both recently finished our master's degree. And it seemed, where the career was going pretty good, but then it was one of those things like, is this, I'm not sure, we had this sense like, is this it, or, do you just like kind of continue on from now? She had changed careers and I had kind of changed jobs and some other things. And then we heard about that, and I had never thought about real estate before. So I didn't really have, it was more like this thing that seemed like something we should do, but I didn't know exactly why. And now, so that sounds kind of weak and like, well, what'd you do it for? But certainly has evolved to another point, and I know there's even other upper levels of like thinking and scope. But certainly now I have kind of motivation that gets me up is, being able to kind of help family and friends, whatever they might need, whether it's sickness. I have a group of friends back in Grand Forks, North Dakota, and they're like this gust of wind took out the front of their office, and they've been struggling to get it back up. Things like that, just like, can I help friends and family just to cover anything that they might come up with? And then of course we all know, the like 100-year thinking and, community-wide and statewide, and you just keep going out. And I know that's there. I don't know, I have no idea what that looks like or where that might grow, but I do know right now that I have this passion, like I want to be able to take care of my friends and family, regardless of what's going on, and just take care of that and use the wealth that way. So that's kind of my, there's something there that's kind of, there's a deep passion there that just kind of that pulls me forward.
Yeah, when you're talking about that, I just brought something to mind. It was like, a lot of people say, well, money doesn't buy happiness, why pursue money? But it may not buy happiness, but it fixes a lot of problems, and that there's a lot of problems you can fix by throwing, dollars at it. And, if it's a problem that you can fix by throwing dollars at it and you have a lot of dollars, the problems go away. So, I think that's, a noble goal. You build your wealth and you use your wealth to help the people around you, the people who are important to you. And I think that's something that drives a lot of people actually. So
Yeah. I think there's a lot of folks in the community that are not driven. I mean, it's like we like money. Money's cool, whatever it's that. But it's like the ultimate, just to have stacks of green cash in a closet. Like it's just, that's not exciting. But it's like, can you use it as, this is not insightful either, but like people say it's a tool. It absolutely is a tool, and I like good tools. I'm an engineer and a carpenter. I like good tools. So this again is like, this is an abstract tool, but it's still a tool, and it's a good tool.
Yeah, well, like any other tool, it's good depending on how you use it, I think, so
I could do a lot of damage correctly with a hammer.
exactly, yeah, a lot of goodness there, but it's definitely a tool. And stacks of money, that's never anybody's goal to have stacks of money. I mean, I used to watch DuckTales growing up, and you see Scrooge McDuck swimming around in his piles of cash and coins and whatever. And at the time I thought that'd be really cool, have so much money you can swim in it, but that's not really the objective. You don't have money to swim in it, to have stacks, to look at it. It's for doing things and helping people.
Even just to speak to that point real quick, Brian, like I've grown so much in the last 2 or 3 years too on what my relationship with money and wealth and personal growth. And like I didn't really know about those things or realize kind of how that fit into my spiritual life, my family life. So it's just been a tremendous amount of growth within that as well. And I think I have a much better and healthier relationship in light of, in view of money, and kind of understanding what money is. So that's something else I feel really satisfied. Not that there was to finish the growth, but like I've just been kind of confident. There's a confidence in knowing, keeping money in its proper place and knowing how to use it, or at least better. There's always another level, but
yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's talk about this deal you guys put together. 40, if I'm not mistaken, 40 units in Minneapolis, Minnesota, plus a fourplex on the side. So so before we launch into details about the deal, let's talk about the team that was able to take this down. Who's on the team, and how did you guys come together?
For sure. As we spoke, the community we joined, Jake and Gino, so that was all members within that. And of course, there's hundreds of people in there, or I don't know how many hundreds, but so it's very diverse. And you clearly don't know everyone. There's people at all different levels, as you could imagine. Very, hundreds of units to one house or whatever that is. So a lot of different things going on. I saw Mac, our partner. He was a local to the area, to Minneapolis. And I've seen, I think we had connected over just some other real estate stuff. There's just like you mentioned about the Idaho properties or the Facebook groups. We connected over some Minneapolis, Minnesota Facebook realty groups. So I saw Mac posting, and we had chatted this and that. And then I saw him doing some real estate, multifamily stuff. Got curious, and then we were kind of doing he was doing stuff and I was doing stuff, and I just thought it was so tedious and so much work. And he had a deal that had fallen through, and I had a deal that I wasn't getting traction in, and just nothing would happen there. And then I think we connected somehow, like, hey, what about partnering up? And even though it was like my heart didn't want to do it, I like this, I'm gonna have to share, blah blah blah. After like 2 weeks, man, or 3 or like a month of that, I was like, oh my God, I'm so glad Mac and I connected. Yeah. And so maybe you've had that experience, or maybe you've seen teams like blossom.
Very similar, actually. Yeah. I mean, very similar experience for Four Oaks too.
And then so my wife was supporting me. So this is also a key piece for the audience, or anyone that might find this valuable. My wife was supporting me. She was a little bit reluctant. She definitely had the mindset of 401k and put the money away in traditional, that type of thing. And was successful in her job. But supporting me, like, well, if you want to do it, I'll get behind you. And then, so she didn't really know her place initially when you kind of got the deal and started kind of rolling. But after we started going, and then she saw her place, then she became like a full-time partner and was instrumental herself. Absolutely doing tons and tons of work, just as much as myself and Mac. Obviously, we were kind of, initiated it, but then after she came on, all three of us were just like, it was like a full-time, for all of us, it was a full-time job in addition to our normal jobs. Yeah. So there was so much to do. So that was, that was the core Minneapolis team.
All right. So your wife and Mac, and I love it. And you're right. I mean, it can be almost a full-time job on top of a full-time job. I think a lot of people who are trying to get into the industry need to hear that, because, it's not something that you can, put in 2 hours here, 4 hours, 2 weeks later and expect to have anything tangible in the back end. It takes a considerable amount of work to get places in this business. So
It does, yeah.
yeah. So let's talk about, finding the deal. How did you come across this deal, and, walk us through the getting under contract piece?
Yeah, that's always kind of exciting. That part excites me. I like that part a lot. I think one thing to state is the recommendations around the community is some people say like, oh, you need to really engage with your brokers. Some of it's like you just network in the local, the meetups. Other people like to just direct to seller. Today's market, especially Minneapolis, is a kind of if you want to get a deal, most of it's a direct to seller thing. It just happens to be the time and just a lot of factors that are kind of influencing that. So the successful people that we're monitoring, watching across the country is like, hey, if you want to be successful, then do direct to seller. I'm like, okay. It's like I was skeptical, like it's going to be a couple $1,000. I don't want to do it. There's no promise. I had all the doubts, and I was like, well, let's go ahead and do it. So we launched a campaign, worked through like which texting and which the messages and all the stuff, who's going to take it. So 2 weeks of effort there, no good hits, a few kind of warm leads, but nothing too positive. They asked them to do another data pull out of CoStar and Reonomy, and then they tweaked the settings a little bit and pulled some additional owners and properties. And then this property was in that next pull of data. And he was one of the hotter leads within that. If there was a hot response or hot lead, they respond, and then they push them to me or whoever, and then we follow with a phone call. So that's kind of the genesis. That's the seeds of the deal, and how that deal kind of came towards us. I'd say that.
Nice. So basically, you set it up so that you get owner contact information from CoStar, from Reonomy, which they those are typically a lot more accurate than a lot of other places. And just had a direct to owner campaign where you're contacting owners when you get warm leads. Now, were you using a virtual assistant for that, or who was doing the calls and the outreach?
Sure, it was one of the guys, two of the guys actually within the group that had they were kind of toying with, say, I think they didn't really pursue it after that, or after they had a handful of people and like, maybe this is a business we could do, and just I don't think it was that profitable, or that that was just so much work for them. So they didn't, not really pushing it, but we just connected, like, hey, what do you have, like, we have access to CoStar, we have like a texting program and some of the other back end software. And they were able to just, we will connect, like, here's the contract, this is how much it's going to be, et cetera. So that's kind of how that, kind of the back end. We all know there's lots of people doing versions of that out there. So, this is just one version of that I came across within the group, and, we kind of just went from there.
Yeah. And I mean, it landed you a 40-unit deal. So does it work? Yeah, it works, and there is, in the industry, there's some stats, and I've seen something like, I think 93% of all apartments, commercial multifamily that changes hands is through a broker, so you have a broker dealer who's handling the deals. So that leaves 7% on the table. You found one of those 7%. There's still a fair amount of properties like that. And I think you're in a larger metro. So I think that there's a lot of things there that are definitely helpful. I mean, Twin Cities, I'm thinking it's probably somewhere, 5 to 7 million people. I'm in Idaho Falls. We've got, just over 100,000. I pulled an owner search from Reonomy. And I think there are 30 properties that are commercial multifamily, and it's like, 4 people own half of them, so it's, So
good. I was just gonna say, that's a great point. And you have, hundreds, dozens or hundreds, depending where you're looking, of all kinds of vintages. But even here, there's, owners, groups of owners that own, many, dozens or tens, or, some clusters of some properties, but, but you just need more of those kinds of people just to kind of statistically have a shot. It's like fishing, it's like, well, maybe I'll catch a big one here. So
Yeah, if you're trying to do that in the smaller metro, you might have a harder time with it. But yeah, it ended up working for you. So you got the owner, and so no broker involved. It was you guys direct with the owner the entire time, right?
that's correct. Yeah. And we were, I don't want to go too deep into it, but there was actually a broker that offered before us, and he had kind of, after I heard the story afterwards from him, I kind of become friends with the broker, and he had kind of, I don't know, maybe prepped the owner for the idea of selling. And like, yeah, and he had kind of a deal there. And then we came in, and he more or less gave it to us. After that, I didn't know there was an offer and a broker at the
Yeah.
concurrently on the deal. So, but yeah, I was super excited to not have a broker. And the owner was pleased with that too. Like he got another like $100 plus thousand bucks, not having to pay a broker. So he was like, well, deal for me.
I mean, if he's got a buyer that's willing to pay the same price, I mean, there's pros and cons to brokers. It's cheaper to go without a broker, and there's a little bit of there's a tendency to have some miscommunications going through brokers, but on the flip side, the brokers do a lot for you, so it's especially for the seller, they're listing it, they're marketing it, they're calling a bunch of people about it, so pros and cons, both directions. But I mean, you guys were kind of able to get through that system and get through that broker veil direct to owner, and you got this 40 unit under contract. So worked out well. So let's talk about the funding piece. So tell us, how you're able to come up with the purchase price, and let's talk money, talk dollars and cents.
I like it. So the owner, after we looked at it, and then he actually shared, even though I didn't know, like I mentioned, I didn't know there was a broker, an agent representing this other team. But he actually showed their offer, because he could say, well, this other team is offering this, and I'm like, well, can you show us the offer? So he was like very upfront and did show us the offer. I was like, oh wow, okay. So I knew, so I knew how much money they were offering on the table, and I had an idea how much I wanted to offer, with kind of a cap rate and where I was targeting, from the syndication model, how much I needed to hit. So there was we were able to kind of triangulate our offering price from that perspective. So I knew there was an offer on the table. I knew how much I needed to get through for the syndication to make that work. So that's kind of how we arrived at that number. And they had a fairly sophisticated, I would say, much more sophisticated than we were gonna craft on their letter of intent, PSA actually. And it was like, achieve this benchmark and then get this, and you get another 100,000. And if you miss it, you get penalties, and, kind of it's fairly elaborate. I don't think the owner or the builder / owner really liked kind of the feel of that. And we're like, we're newbies. We're not sophisticated. Here's our price, a little more than the other guys are offering. There's no agent. And just kind of using our kind of our connections and our personality, and that's kind of how we kind of not stole the deal, but kind of got the deal. Basically it was kind of like it's kind of a toss up for him, and we were able to just pull ahead by a nose, and that's how he kind of gave we got there. The funding piece, we went like it's $5.5 million bucks for the deal. That was the price we agreed on. Got the purchase agreement signed, so that was obviously a legal contract, so got to raise that money. We're targeting a raise of around $1.5 million. There's no way in hell that myself and my wife and partner had that money, so we needed a KP, and then also we were going to just go with a syndication model, just straight standard syndication model. And after we did the webinar, we got the groundbreaker, we pitched it and all this kind of stuff. Fairly anemic response initially from investors around the country. They were a little tepid on Minnesota. Obviously we had the rioting and this other news that catch people's attention. So it wasn't the most robust response, you might say. Near that time, the owner offered, for not totally sure, but I think just to facilitate the deal, because he wanted to take the money, cash, get his equity out, and start doing another deal. And he offered to do seller financing, basically a contract for deed. And I lowballed him on like, well, how much do you want for a down payment, and I knew, from other competitions, he wanted like, $1 million plus. And I'm like, could you do 800K? He's like, okay, well, no less than that, but I could do that. I'm like, yes, so
All right.
I was pretty pumped about that.
And now your capital raise gets cut in half because, your financing just got better.
Yeah, man. I mean, so then we rerun the numbers on obviously the syndication, and money is expensive. If you're asking people to give you money, and then you're going to put the money to the deal, so there's a cost to that. Also, there's if we could bring this in house and find just a small group of people, like holy crap, that you should have seen the change of that spreadsheet. Like, wow, this is hot.
Yeah. Now, what were the other terms? I mean, he's given you a little more leverage, more, higher percentage on the loan, on the loan value, but was interest rates competitive, and the other terms as well?
Yeah. So he was willing to, so he had a construction loan. He had, I think it was 20% down on between him and his family money when he started the project. And within that construction loan, it automatically went into long-term financing. I think it was a 20-year AM on that thing. So he was guaranteed, a long-term hold on that with the money and equity obviously that he built into the deal. So he was going to give us straight across the same terms. Yeah, he wasn't even gonna do tick up 50 bips or anything like that. Just straight across what he was paying to his bank, he was gonna pass on to us. So that was pretty phenomenal. I thought that was phenomenal.
Yeah, you can't beat that. I mean,
I
probably would have expected
his cost of capital. He was passing on directly to us.
Exactly. I mean, personally, I probably would have added exactly what you said about 50 basis points to that, and here,
just
made a little
hassle.
more on it.
Just my hassle of messing around with it.
All right, so you're basically paying his loan down, and okay, so you're paying his loan down. You gave him some money up front, which helps him recoup his 20% in before the construction loan started paying for his project. And those are the terms of the deal you worked out essentially.
More or less, yeah, yep, yeah. It was like, again, it morphed into we had we were looking at bridge loans, local, recourse, non-recourse, syndication, agency. I mean, we literally just by chance iterated through almost all the financing out there. We looked at that, and then this offer to seller finance came through, and obviously that's a win. You don't have to be that sophisticated and realize that's you should go that route if you can pull it off.
Yeah.
And then
now you say,
go ahead, sorry, yeah.
Go ahead and finish your thought, and then I want to dive deeper on something you said earlier.
Yeah, and then clearly we still needed to come up with a couple of one or two or whatever key principles, someone to bring most of that equity, the capital. So it worked out within the group. There were somebody with 1031 money, and they had sold the warehouse. And so we were talking with lots of folks, like who can do this, who should do this, trying to find a good match. And it finally came to be like, well, we just sold this warehouse, kind of family money. I think we could actually just take this down ourselves. I'm like, holy smokes, this is amazing. And that kind of just tied that up. Like, so we found, two KPs, our core team, we were bringing some operating capital. Like we were about like 100,000 each. And then of course with the majority of it with the 1031, and that 1031, we even though we agreed, which is kind of somewhat of a strange situation, we agreed at 8, and just because he needed to place additional 1031 capital, it grew to almost twice that. He just like the owner's not going to bulk it like, oh, you were going to give me 8, now you're going to give me 1.5 or 1.6.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna say no.
Yeah, I think that ended up working for both of you. I mean, the seller's extra happy, and the person bringing the 1031 money. I mean, they've got to place it all, or they're paying. There's the taxes they have to pay, and I mean, who knows what their basis price is? I mean, could it be they're avoiding a significant tax bill? So, yeah, it ended up working beautifully. It sounds like.
Yeah, a lot of wins there. The way, even though there was some contentious points there, but a lot of kind of a truly a win-win-win. Win for us, obviously, the people that kind of got the deal. Win for the owner. Win for the the 1031 folks. So really a lot of a lot of value created in that.
Yeah. Now you said originally you tried to raise money, and you said there wasn't a whole lot of interest. What do you think the reason was on that one? I mean, have you put a lot of thought into that one?
I have, and I think we were relying on other people that said this raise will be like a couple things. And as most things are, there's not just, there's like a prism of perspectives and reasons. Definitely some of the top 2 or 3 is, like I said, I mentioned about the reservations about Minneapolis. There was, obviously there was rioting, and it was generated a lot of consternation across the country. Well, we all know the story there. So that dampened people's enthusiasm, and we were relying on people that said, "Oh, this will be an easy raise," and we hadn't, I guess, maybe developed those relationships solidly enough for ourselves. So we're like there's other groups and maybe some other masterminds. These parallel strings. Like, yeah, that it'll happen. And so those definitely 2 things influence the how much how the hard commits. We had some soft commits, but maybe we were like a quarter there with soft commits before we kind of we shut that down. But definitely something to foster your relationships directly, but also, and so it's kind of there's two thoughts there. Foster relationships directly, and develop that confidence that yes, we can raise this money. But also, I think we were so persistent and so focused on making the deal happen. I think that intentionality, opened up the door. At least, this can't be proven. Open up the door to finding a way. So those two things there.
Yeah. So I mean, a couple of points. I mean, Minnesota is not. Minneapolis and St. Paul are growing extremely fast. There's a lot of growth there, but I don't think you hear about it a lot. I mean, it's one of the largest metros in the U.S. and there is a lot of growth there. But if you look at, who's the belle of the ball, so to speak, it's usually the southern markets.
Absolutely.
When you look at the general demographics in the U.S. right now, I mean, Minneapolis is kind of like the outlier in the north, because a lot of populations moving from north to south, from big cities to more open spaces, from high cost of living to low cost of living. But Minneapolis is like the one northern city that's still doing extremely well and growing fast. So
a real regional attraction. A lot of people, and then but that's absolutely correct. Is that it's kind of bucking the northern trend, and it's offering a lot with the proteins and medical device manufacturing and technology here and fintech, and a lot of really cool things happening here. So but then you make a great point.
Yeah. So a lot of that, and something else you brought up, when I first started trying, looking for deals, there was this mentality. It was like the field of dreams. If you have a good deal, the money will come. And we found out that that's not 100% accurate. And
we found that out too.
I think you learned the same lesson we did. Is we should have been a lot more prepared up front. And a lot of people say, do you focus on deal and money will come, or do you focus on money and deal? Kind of the what comes first. And I think I started out solidly in the find a good deal camp, but the more and more I've done this, the more people I talk to, I think it's the opposite. If you have money, the deals will come. And the more money you can get, the bigger you can grow and the faster. But it's not a given that if you have a good deal, the money will come. But I mean, at the end of the day,
very
your network you found a way. So
yeah. It's kind of, it's one of those things. It's the level of confidence and how stressful the situation is going to unfold, and it's kind of at the 11th hour some situation came to be, and it worked out. But absolutely, like, if you want to have more confidence and less stress, I really second what you're saying there. Is develop a better foundation. Like, doesn't have to be perfect or like a cash printing machine, but definitely spend a good amount of time there, and then you can grow forward with a lot more confidence.
That's something that we focus on a lot more, is just that capital raising arm. And like I said, if I had a do-over, I would have focused on the capital raising arm, long before I did. Even on our first deal, I would focus on it, long before I did. I kind of had the mentality that I'll just find somebody I can partner with that can bring money to the table. And it ended up being what we did, but it still was a very stressful raise, because we were all somewhat new to it. But so you already walked us through finding the deal and funding the deal, and let's talk about the steps getting to the closing table. I know you closed on it. we're recording this mid-January. I think you closed on it last week of December, right?
That's correct. Yep. No.
So talk about getting to the closing table. Were there any big hitches or any big issues that came up?
So many we could probably fill 2 podcasts. So let me try to grab the top worst hits here.
Yeah.
The builder was, we knew there was inherent risk in new construction. Of course, what's the vacancy rate on new construction? It's 100%. And also the builder, there's a risk in the builder. This was his first larger new build. He'd been doing construction for a long time, but not a lot of experience doing new and working with the city at this scale. And so he was basically struggling, I would say, to finish the deal, finish the construction at the right level, at the right speed, at the right time, and the right level of quality. So, being in the construction and a contractor myself, or formerly anyway, I knew kind of the cadence and what to look for and how things were going. And the last, 5-10%, like, dude, like, you need to wrap this up, get this done. I know other people have seen the same thing with other contractors, but that was a wall that he hit. And then there was these elements, and this is again, trying to hit the highlights. Working with a city, there was some restrictive covenants that popped up that we didn't know about. And then there was also just getting the certificate of occupancy, which we all know, or maybe people not, not, but the certificate of occupancy, you can't have it, you have to have it, or you can't lease the building. And so there was that, we need this done, we need that's not completed, there's a plumbing, there's a radon, all this stuff. And so our effort basically was able to work kind of around and through the builder and get that done. They were just kind of stalled out. We literally would have been another month or 2 without having the CO. So the day, here's a little factoid. I was on the phone and texting all the inspectors, what's going on, what's the next steps. And I was texting the builder and the subs, and this is not my job, but I was initiating this and trying to make it happen.
You got to get the deal done. So whether it's your job or not, I mean, you lose the deal if it's not done.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have this business plan, and we need to, lease up at this date. Of course, Minnesota is northern, so I don't want to start leasing up in the middle of January. It's freaking cold. So we had this business plan, and fall into hell because the builder wasn't done and the CO wasn't issued. So we got the CO issued the day before our first move in, and we talked a month before, what kind of risk are we willing to adopt here with pre-leases? We need to get people in there and need to start making money, because I'm not going to wait until the middle of the month and because it needs to generate cash. It's like a flywheel. You need to get this rolling before you get snacked with the mortgage, because the mortgage is coming as soon as you close. So we got the CO the day before the first tenant moved in. A little tight, literally a matter of hours before the CO, the tenant would move in. And of course, if we didn't have it, they couldn't have moved in. But so that was right down the wire.
Nice. Well, it got done, and I mean, you're 2-3 weeks closed on it right now. Where are you right now? I mean, you haven't had a whole lot of time, but
so we started, we started, even though we didn't close, that was another thing that a little bit hairy, but we were willing to take the risk on. So we started leasing in October, actually, knowing that the owner wasn't, as long as we had the CO, we're going to start pre-leasing. And even though we hadn't closed, we got a little bit kind of chippy about whose money it was when the rent was coming in, but we got that worked out. And the final closing things were simply just them not having some of the things done, like the phase 1, the as-built survey. And we asked for literally 6 weeks. The title company asked for 6 weeks, his legal counsel, to please provide that. And then we had a meeting in the beginning of December, and they said, there is no phase 1 and there is no survey. Can't close. You can't why did you literally just could have, I'm sorry to get so passionate here. All you would have to say, even if you were not wanting to pay for it or whatever your motivation was, just simply tell us this doesn't exist. And we would have paid for it right away and got it rolling. So just asinine.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of things in there that you have to have. And I mean, you have to have them. That's really the end of the day story. So, so up to the wire, you still ended up closing before the end of the year, which, good, nice win for the year. So what's next for you?
we're going to just continue looking for, we're going to stay focused in the Twin Cities area. I'm definitely more leaning towards our team, not say me, but our team. Definitely looking in the Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, the suburbs, first and second, even third ring suburbs as well. And within just the Nelson household, and we're starting a fund as well. That's where I'm pretty excited about that. And that will be focused in just the multifamily space, B class, value add. But then quickly, I want to go expand to other things. I want to development, and I want to use there's some modular ADUs, and even build to rent. So there's lots of niches, as I know everyone in this podcast is aware of some of these other avenues of where the real estate investing can go. So that's super exciting too. So the fund will be an Arctos Capital fund, and it'll fund alongside this deal and other deals as well. So it'll be a capital raising machine that will contribute.
Nice. Sounds exciting. Lots of opportunities there. One of the last questions, I got two more questions for you, but this is probably my favorite one from this type of episode. What advice would you give somebody who's 6 to 12 months behind you?
I would give them the advice that I know that others have said similar things, but take a step in the direction of where you want to go. Even though, because let's just speak to my concern right now is I don't know what I'm doing very deeply in the fund space. I'm connected with the right, some really good people, some teams, but there's lots that's sitting on me that I need to figure out. Same thing in the multifamily space. Simply take, if you don't have a bias for action, just simply take a step in that direction. And then after you take that step, and take another step in that direction that's towards that area. There's lots of people that come to us, to me, my wife, our partner Mac, and other people well, you guys are ahead of me. All I've done is single families. You guys, it's like we were just like you, to your point, 6 months ago or a year ago, and we just took an uncomfortable step towards that direction. And that's probably the best, the most generic, but also helpful advice that I could provide.
Yeah. And something I realized, a while ago is everybody really starts at the same place. If you look at, we're all born bare naked and crying, right? So, if you look at it from that perspective, anything anybody's achieved, they all started at this life in relatively the same position. So, it's just that they've taken more steps in that direction than someone else. And I really like that. Wherever you want to go, just start going in that direction. Just start walking, and you'll learn, you'll grow, and you'll get there a lot faster, so
it'll be, and maybe some people are more confident or less confident, or 3/4 of what you need to know, but it's typically it's probably you don't know, and it's going to be real uncomfortable. So it's when you're stepping, I guess that's one indicator you can use, like how uncomfortable and how awkward is this right now. And if it's very much that way, you're truly in a space or a place of growth for yourself, because you don't know what the hell is going on. So it just means that you don't, it's like a child, like they're scared, you're crying, you don't know what's going on. That's because you haven't learned that. It just means that it's an opportunity to really grow a muscle that's either not there or it's atrophied. So embrace it.
And a lot of people have said this, and I'll just repeat it. It's you need to get to be successful. I think you need to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yes, I love that one. Yes.
As backwards as that sounds, you need to be comfortable feeling uncomfortable. So, get used to it. And, that's really where growth occurs, is when you're stepping outside of your comfort zone and pushing the limits. So, anyway, last question for you. How can listeners learn more about you?
Well, thanks for that offer. And the best way is just to send an email. I'm working on some social media and maybe even a podcast, some other cool things. But if you're not there, you're not there. So it's our email, arctoscapital@gmail.com, and I can spell that ARCTOSCAPITAL. So it's arctoscapital@gmail.com. Yeah.
Anybody who's interested in reaching out, that information is going to be in the show notes. Check it out and reach out to them. So he's talking about the podcast and other things. I'm sure you're taking steps in the right direction right now, right?
It is, yeah. But again, things I don't know, things I don't like. How does this go? What equipment? Who do I talk to? And even being on a podcast like this is a thing of growth for me. Like we're not born most people aren't born with a natural ability to speak and tell a story and share things like this. So even this opportunity that you've allowed me is growth for me as we speak,
Yeah.
as for me to share this. So I appreciate that too. And,
Awesome. Perfect. Well, hey, thank you so much today for coming on the show. Very much appreciate your time. And yeah, hopefully we'll be, seeing your podcast out and seeing much more great things coming out of the that great northern city of Minneapolis, St. Paul.
I like it, man. So thank you, Brian. Thanks for sharing, allowing me to chat with your audience and share our story.
Hey, if you like that episode, make sure to subscribe. But more importantly, if you haven't joined our multifamily educational community, the Tribe of Titans, you're missing out. Get 30 days free by clicking the link in the description or go to thetribeoftitans.info, and we'll see you there.